Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, a beautiful princess with skin as white as snow was born. She was named Snow White. Everyone in the kingdom loved her dearly. But after her mother passed away, a new queen came into the picture. This queen was exceedingly beautiful, but her jealousy was just as intense. Every day, the queen would ask her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the mirror would always reply, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." However, as time passed, the mirror's answer changed. "Snow White is the fairest of them all." This filled the queen with rage. The queen summoned a huntsman and ordered him to take Snow White deep into the forest and eliminate her. But the huntsman, moved by Snow White's pure and innocent beauty, couldn't bring himself to harm her. He left her alone in the forest and returned to the queen. Lost and scared, Snow White wandered through the forest until she found a small cottage. She entered the cottage, which belonged to the 7 dwarfs. Snow White fell asleep inside the dwarfs' cottage. When the dwarfs returned home, they discovered a stranger in their house. They were startled at first, but quickly charmed by Snow White's innocence and peaceful appearance. The 7 dwarfs asked Snow White to stay with them and help with the household chores. Snow White gladly accepted. Each of the 7 dwarfs had a unique personality and talent. There was Doc, the wise one; Grumpy, the grouchy one; Happy, the cheerful one; Sleepy, the sleepy one; Bashful, the shy one; Sneezy, the sneezy one; and Dopey, the silent but lovable one. They all loved Snow White, and she enjoyed spending time with them. However, the queen soon discovered that Snow White was still alive. She decided to disguise herself and deliver a poisoned apple to Snow White. One day, the queen, disguised as an old peddler woman, visited the dwarf's cottage with a basket of apples. She held out a half-red, half-white apple. "Would you like an apple, dear?" she asked sweetly. Snow White, being innocent, accepted the apple. But the dwarfs had warned Snow White not to take anything from strangers. Remembering their warning, Snow White declined the apple. The queen was disappointed but determined to try again. She started planning another way to get rid of Snow White. The next day, the queen prepared an even more potent plan. This time, she created a beautiful comb laced with poison. Disguised once again, she returned to the cottage and offered the comb to Snow White, saying, "This comb would look lovely in your hair." Snow White hesitated, recalling the dwarf's warnings, but the queen's insistence convinced her to accept the comb. As soon as Snow White placed the comb in her hair, she fell unconscious. When the dwarfs returned, they found her and immediately removed the comb, saving her once more. The queen was furious but still not ready to give up. She began devising her third and final plan. For her last attempt, the queen prepared the most dangerous poison she had ever concocted and injected it into a flawless red apple. Disguised yet again, she approached the cottage and begged Snow White to take the apple. "Please, take this beautiful apple." Snow White, once again recalling the dwarf's warnings, was hesitant but eventually took a bite out of the apple due to the queen's relentless pleading. Immediately, she fell into a deep, death-like sleep. When the dwarfs returned home and found Snow White, they were heartbroken. This time, they could not revive her. In their sorrow, They placed her in a glass coffin in the forest and kept vigil by her side every day. Time passed, and the story of the beautiful maiden in the glass coffin spread far and wide. Eventually, it reached the ears of a prince, who decided to see the maiden for himself. The prince was captivated by Snow White's beauty and fell in love with her at first sight. Determined to wake her, he kissed her tenderly. At that moment, Snow White awoke as if by magic. She thanked the prince, and they gazed into each other's eyes, feeling a profound love for one another. Snow White and the prince returned to his castle. She bid a heartfelt farewell to the 7 dwarfs, who wished her all the happiness in the world. They were sad to see her go, but happy for her future. When the queen learned that Snow White was alive and had been revived by the prince, she was shocked. She turned to her mirror once more. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are beautiful, but Snow White is the fairest of them all." Consumed by rage and jealousy, the queen's evil deeds eventually led to her downfall. Snow White and the prince married and lived happily ever after. After their marriage, Snow White and the prince ruled the kingdom with kindness and wisdom. Snow White, having learned much from her experiences, was a fair and understanding ruler. Her people adored her for her compassion and fairness. The 7 dwarfs were frequent guests at the castle, enjoying many joyful times together. Snow White and the prince were always grateful to the dwarfs for their love and support, and together they maintained peace and happiness in the kingdom. As time went by, Snow White and the prince had beautiful children who grew up surrounded by love and care. Snow White often told them her story, teaching them the importance of kindness and courage. The kingdom remained peaceful and prosperous, with Snow White and the prince living happily together for many, many years. Their love and trust in each other never wavered, and they all lived happily ever after.